This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Just a heads up, this episode contains discussions of sexual assault, abuse through exploitation of kink and BDSM, and relationships after abuse. Some may find it upsetting. We encourage you to take care of yourself. There's a side of trauma that people don't talk about enough, the way it lingers in our most intimate spaces. It's one thing to heal from the past, to understand what happened, to name the abuse, the manipulation, the coercion. But then what? What triggers? What happens when you try to move forward? When you want to trust again, to love again, to be touched again? What happens when the very thing that's supposed to bring joy, intimacy, connection, and pleasure feels like uncharted territory? For many, many survivors, sex and dating after trauma feels impossible. Because when all you ever known is a form of coercion, manipulation, or abuse as it relates to intimacy, where do you even begin? How do you know what's normal, what's safe, what's yours to reclaim? How do you separate what was done to you from what you actually want? What does it mean to desire, to feel worthy of love, to trust your own body again? These are questions so many survivors wrestle with. And the truth is, healing isn't linear. Some of us take years before we even think about dating. Some of us try too soon and get hurt all over again. Some of us avoid intimacy altogether, not because we don't want it, but because we don't know how to navigate it without fear of it happening again. That's why today's episode is so important, because healing isn't just about surviving, it's about reclaiming. It's about learning how to love again, how to set boundaries, how to feel safe in your own skin. It's about understanding that sex after trauma isn't just about sex. It's about your self-worth, your self-love, and knowing that you have the right to pleasure on your own terms. My guest today is Myisha Battle. She's a certified clinical sexologist who has dedicated her career to helping others and helping people, especially survivors, navigate intimacy, relationships, and healing. She's here to help us unpack the weight of trauma, the power of boundaries, and the beauty of reclaiming our bodies and our desires. If you've ever struggled with dating after trauma, if sex has ever felt confusing, triggering, or unsafe, if you've ever wondered whether love after pain is even possible, this conversation is for you. So let's dive in. Today's guest is a certified sex and dating coach, educator, and author. Myisha Battle is the host of KCRW's How's Your Sex Life podcast and writes the Real Love column for Time. Her book, This Is Supposed to Be Fun, How to Find Joy in Hooking Up, Settling Down, and Everything in Between, is available now wherever you like to buy books. I am so grateful today to welcome Myisha Battle to From Now On. Welcome, Myisha.
Thank you.
So you're a certified clinical sexologist. Many of our audience doesn't understand or doesn't know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain thoroughly what that means to be a clinical certified sexologist?
Sure. Yeah. So my training is actually as a sex coach. And one of the reasons that I think it's helpful for me to identify as a clinical sexologist is that when I say sex coach, people think I'm in their bedrooms looking at them, giving them scorecards.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what I do. What I do is in alignment with what a lot of other practitioners do in the sexological sphere.
Okay.
So we're talking counselors, therapists, coaches. We would all be considered clinicians. Who are working one-on-one with clients, or in my case, I do work with couples. It means anybody who has training in the field of sexology. So we've really studied sex and we understand the most common issues that people experience in their sexual lives, and we're prepared to help guide them through it. Each practitioner has a different method of working through sexual issues. For me, I use a coaching framework. So it's very action-based. It's very goal-oriented. Whereas a sex therapist might be focused more on helping someone process past traumas. And a counselor is also equipped to help with that deep healing as well on an emotional level. They just may have a different approach, not as like homework assignee as I am. Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's a very diverse group of
Mhm.
people, but ultimately at our core, we want people to have fulfilling sex lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've been wanting to have an expert on to talk about sex and dating after abuse and trauma because when all you've ever known is a form of coercion, manipulation, or abuse as it relates to intimacy, it's hard to know where to even begin on having a healthy relationship. I'm curious if you could estimate what percentage of your clients that you work with have experienced some form of sexual violence or trauma.
Yeah. I would estimate that the amount of clients that I work with who have a history of sexual violence or assault is around 30%. However, I would say I speak to more people and have consultations with more people who have histories of sexual assault or, rape. And it's across genders.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people have a picture in their mind of it's only women or it's only, a sexual minority. But yeah, I do work with clients, male clients who have had histories of sexual abuse. And yeah, I think this is a conversation that needed to be had. We are just getting our footing and understanding the mechanisms of abuse and why people might find themselves in a situation that's coercive or abusive. We don't really talk about what happens after and how people can go on to live very full, loving, and sexually fulfilled
Mm-hmm.
lives. And that is something that I've seen not only in my practice, but in my private life. I have folks who I've watched their journeys over the years and, seen them find partners and love and support. So I'm just very appreciative that you're creating space for this conversation here.
Mm-hmm. So, what is the difference with someone who has had sexual trauma, who's now in the dating world, who would talk to like a regular therapist about getting over those fears and moving on to a relationship?
Mhm.
What would you do differently?
Yeah. So, what I do when I consult with clients is really assess if they're appropriate for coaching,
Mm-hmm.
which again is that action based. What are your dating goals? What do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
In those cases, I'm really looking for someone who's aware of their triggers if they have a
The
history
triggers. Okay.
of sexual assault. And I'm wanting to hear from them that they have done some work with a therapist or,
Oh, prior.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or are working with a therapist, or they have some other form of healing. I think there's a dominant narrative that we have to seek out therapy, but I mean, throughout the course of human history, that's not been something that's accessible
Mm-hmm.
to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And people overcome traumas in a variety of different ways. So when I'm consulting with someone to see, perhaps if they want to work with me for dating coaching, some people can't talk about the things that they're struggling with without crying.
Mm-hmm.
They're still
Mm-hmm.
in that place of deep pain. And that shows me that they haven't processed quite to the degree that would be safe for working with a coach
Right.
because I'm not equipped, and if you work with a if you, I just want to have a caveat that like there are coaches out there who will take those clients,
Right.
but it is my training and my background and my understanding that I am not well equipped to help someone walk that path through healing trauma.
Mm.
I'm there to support you when you're like, you know what? I've talked my trauma to death.
Mm-hmm.
I am kind of sick of my story. I'm
Mm-hmm.
ready for a new story. I'm ready for what's to come. And I'm open to figuring out the path, understanding that I have tools now in my toolkit for navigating if I do get triggered or if I do come across someone who reminds me of that toxic ex or, and I have the support network around me that's going to be there for me through this dating process because, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
dating stirs up a lot of shit.
It sure does.
And so we need a lot of support and we need different forms of support. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I'm working with clients who have that psychological support. They have a community, they have a team, they have their squad, and they also have me who's, looking at, from point A to point B, how do we want to get you there?
Mm-hmm.
And how can we make sure that you are really thinking critically at every step of the way about these people. Can I protect them 100%? No,
Right.
because there are a lot of people out there that fly under the radar and are terrible. I'm just going to be honest. But
Right.
having that sort of support to say, okay, wait, let's think about this. Let's take this slow. What's coming up for you when you spend time with this person? Do you feel safe? Do you not feel safe? How do you want to proceed with introducing sex into the relationship? Do you feel like you have a good enough communication vibe with this person to move in that direction? That's really where my area of support is.
So in your opinion, do you think when you come into therapy and you're crying, so you're kind of in the throes of it where you're not really ready for therapy? Only because in my experience, for the first maybe 4 or 5 months, I didn't cry at all. And then my therapist was always trying to get to me the place where when I would actually start crying, oh, there it is. And then we can move from that and go deeper.
Yes. There are levels, right? There are definitely cases where the brain wants you to normalize and be able to move through the experience. This happened to me, it's very matter of fact, right? And then there's the explosive, I'm now kind of reliving and understanding what happened to me. And I'm maybe even incorporating the layers of coercion. It's not just the story that I tell, it's also, and this is how I felt when it was happening. And that's really real for me, And so that's the level that your therapist was trying to get to. The quick distinction is that, like, for me, I'm a coach. Your therapist was there to hold space for that process of you to get from, this isn't just the story that you tell everybody that this happened, to you, which I know that very well. I'm not a sexual assault survivor, but I have, a history of trauma. And so, yeah, I was very quick. And I would even tell people, right, this is my whole story, and I wasn't feeling it.
Okay.
Right. So when we get to the level of feeling, that's where the therapeutic healing can help. And sometimes people kind of stay there and don't move beyond to the next phase, which is, I know when it's appropriate to tell my story. I know how to tell it, and I can incorporate what's mine and also what the other person's was in that situation. I can tell a more nuanced story. So that's my understanding of that kind of like healing journey. But I think sometimes when we are fully in the emotion, like there's still stuff that needs to come out and be processed. So that's what I'm saying. It's that, like, it takes a lot. I also want to acknowledge to send an email to any kind of provider saying I need help. So I take every single consultation call very seriously, but it's really my job to try to assess where someone is at and the right resource for them at that right time.
Yeah, I like that you said that it's important to have the therapy first before coming to you, right? Because for me, going through therapy for so many months, just to get to that level, it's like, okay, are you ready to date? Are you ready to manifest that man? No, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I was single for 2 years, going through therapy. And then when I finally felt ready and was out in the dating world, that's when I felt like I needed someone like you. Because like, wait a second, how do I process this now? Having boundaries. And when someone talks about sex and the triggers that would come up, like how do I handle that? So that's something that you would deal with when you're going through that dating process.
Right. So usually people who work with me are able to say, I get triggered if someone comes up from behind. I don't like that, and I dissociate. I don't like it when I fall asleep before my partner because I don't feel safe. Because something happened in that context, right? So they're able to sort of understand these are the contexts under which I don't feel safe. And I'm able to hold that and say, well, you can certainly hold that as a boundary. You can not stay the night with someone, you can, until you feel ready and safe to do so. You can tell that other person how you want to be approached, and you can disclose your history and the why behind that at any point. You know, I'm somebody who's like, if you want to tell somebody don't come up from, behind to me, like there should be no question or pushback about that or a digging and questioning. Why can't I do that?
Right. And they should also have respect for it.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a respect thing. It's just like, oh, this person doesn't like that. I don't need to know why. I just need to know that they don't like it. Okay.
And that's a red flag if they keep doing it.
100%. Right. So I'm there to also hold them to, their feet to the fire. Okay, everything you learned in therapy about what happened and why and your part in it. How can we do things a little bit differently? How can we challenge you to be less of a people pleaser in certain moments? How can we challenge you to say the thing you're kind of like holding back because you're afraid you're going to make this other person uncomfortable when you yourself are uncomfortable? And I love watching my clients. They don't even have to have a history of sexual assault to feel that, especially as women. And I love seeing them say, this is what it is for me. This is what I need you to do for me. And that's it. That's it. I don't like that. Or I do like that. More of that, please.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, because unfortunately, a lot of women who have been assaulted find themselves in other relationships, other abusive relationships.
Yes. Yes.
One after the other, until they kind of realize their boundaries and how to notice these red flags from the start.
Right.
Before getting, sucked into the relationship.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times these abusers are looking for those.
They are.
Sensitivities or vulnerabilities in you or oversharing. Right? And then they kind of use that against you later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I think it is important to figure out how you want to tell your story.
Sometimes waiting.
Yeah. Until you feel comfortable that you can trust this other person with your story.
Yeah, because safety is so important.
Yes.
Like feeling safe. You don't always feel safe from the start.
Right.
That takes time.
Yeah. Trust has to be earned and no one is entitled to your story. Period.
No one is entitled to your story.
No. You get to say when and how and where and why, and it could be, I'm falling in love. I feel safe. This person has proven themselves to be a very trustworthy person to me. And I think I'm ready. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's people out there who are very deceptive, who can pretend like they're listening and they're offering you an ear all the time and supportive.
Yes.
Yeah. And they can turn around months later and use it against you.
Yes. And unfortunately, I think that our culture has an unrealistic expectation of what falling in love is.
From the movies. And,
that feeds into this notion that, especially as women, we have to give ourselves over to men. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing love right. And so that's something that I've definitely had to work with my clients on, because a lot of that preying on vulnerability starts quite early. And what we're dealing with now in the dating landscape is a lot of non-committal, wishy-washy experiences with people, across genders, but primarily speaking for women.
Because so many options.
And there's so many options. So when you got a guy who is messaging consistently, telling you things that you've wanted somebody to say about you forever, and really making you feel like you are the center of his world, I have to remind people, this man doesn't know you. He doesn't know you. And that feels uncomfortable for someone to say. It's like, no, but he's supposed to be able to see in me what other men don't see.
Right, exactly.
And I'm like, he's not seeing you at all. He is seeing an opportunity.
But that feels so good.
It feels amazing.
Right. Yeah. As even my therapist would always say, it shouldn't feel so good in the beginning. It should almost feel a little boring.
Yeah.
They're taking the time to get to know you. It's like, why aren't they calling me? Why aren't they complimenting me? Why aren't they doing all these things? No, that's love bombing.
Right.
Right. And then you're always thinking that you want to have that feeling, but a lot of times it should be a little boring. They should be taking their time to get to know you.
Yes. I myself have had to understand that the practice of dating is nerve-wracking, quite tedious, and not always that fun. Because it can stir up so much in us, as I mentioned before, but it should be stirring something up in the other person as well. And the beginnings of relationships are often messy and confusing, but we don't have that as a cultural narrative.
Right.
We have the narrative of you meet someone, there's a spark.
Oh, sparks.
They see you, you see them, and boom, you're off to the races. And then it's
Right.
just, you know.
Well, usually when it starts out that hot and heavy, it doesn't last.
There's a lot of that. I mean, there's examples of that working out. And so some people might even have that in their friend group and they go, well, it worked for
Right.
my
That's
friends.
true. Yeah.
Why shouldn't it work for me? I deserve that kind of love, right?
Oh yeah, like my friends met on Tinder and they got married. Yeah, that's probably a really small percentage.
Yeah, I met my partner on Tinder. Full
Oh,
disclosure.
no.
But back in the day, and I feel like dating apps have really changed.
Yeah, but most likely you're not meeting your partner on Tinder.
Yeah, before it was OkCupid too. So I don't know. There is something that I have to say is changing about and making life more difficult for people who are dating on the apps right now, which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I do want people to realize too that only about 12% of people are meeting people on the apps.
Only 12%.
That's right.
They make it seem like it's so much higher.
They do make
it
it.
used to be higher.
It used to be higher.
Yeah, because people are falling off these apps now.
They are, but also there's such a commercialization and commodification of it. You know, when you had apps or websites, even like Match.com and OkCupid, these were really designed to involve a lot of questions. I was actually describing this to one of my younger clients and trying to encourage her to put more in her profile about who she is and what she wants.
What she wants.
Because back in the day, if you've ever filled out like a Match or an OkCupid profile, it's so many questions. And, you know, not to say that it's 100% guaranteed that you would find a partner that way back in the day, but there were a lot more there was a lot more criteria.
Right. So the algorithm was really trying to match you up to the right person.
It was trying to help you along by saying, hey, this is like where the two of you overlap, you know, on these questions. Here are the things that might be different about you. And that actually formed the basis of great conversations because you could say, wow, interesting. You like this, but not this, or you do this, but not this. So it really gave you a bit of data. These days, you've got nothing to go on. You've got pictures and 5 words, basically, which is not the basis for a long-term relationship. It's very difficult to make decisions with that limited data.
Yeah, that's true. Nowadays, it's like there's no matching.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You kind of just look at the profiles and swipe and
it's
then...
all on you.
And there's just so many options.
Yes, a ton. And that's the thing too. I think back in the day, you were on Match, you were on eHarmony, or you were on OkCupid, or
but now there's Bumble.
Now there's everything under the sun.
Hinge, Bumble, The League,
and people could be on
Raya.
Of them. Yeah, people could be on all of them, and they're a time suck. You know, this is something that is also playing into people's vulnerabilities. So you have a system that is very sort of difficult and not very transparent. You know, you hear these stories. People might be meeting. Okay, well, why not me, right? What am I doing wrong? And then you do have these mostly guys who understand that if they make a bit of effort, they can stand out from a crowd, especially if they're halfway decent looking. Let's be honest, and over 6 feet, because that's what people are looking for. And I always try to help my clients get involved with shorter men because this is nonsense. But I digress.
Oh, I'm a big advocate for shorter men.
Okay, bless.
Yeah,
because
I'm not one of those. It has to be super tall. I just never really. I look at my girlfriends that have the best husbands, and they're like 5'8", 5'9", 5'10".
Listen, stand a short king. Yeah, I do. But yeah, I think a lot of our experience on these apps is it's kind of prepping us for toxic situations because by the time we meet up, we're exhausted. Like our emotions have just been so taxed by, okay, I'm finally going on a date. This person is halfway decent. And if they are, nice, if they ask a lot of questions, if they give a lot of compliments, that breaks with a lot of what women are experiencing from men right now who do not show up to dates very enthusiastic, do not ask a lot of questions, maybe out of nerves, let's be honest. But because we are so quick to judge, a lot of people are more likely to choose the charismatic guy who asks a lot of questions and gives a
Yeah.
lot of compliments. And let me tell you, he's been doing that to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but they do get the second, the third, fourth date.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And sometimes they are the ones who are the most coercive because those are tactics.
Yeah.
We talk about games in dating, and that's the biggest one that I try to help people pinpoint.
Yeah, that's why I've looked into like dating the more boring ones.
Boring is nice.
Boring is nice. Yeah.
Yes.
Not having like ulterior motives.
Yeah. Well, and just think about the difference between making decisions about someone when your nervous system is so activated by, oh my God, wow. Like they're giving me something that I feel deficient in, right? Versus acting from this place of, I feel like I'm really connecting with this person. And I don't have to, it's not about how good I am to them because they barely know me. It's about us really trying to form a connection and understand each other. It's a very different experience. And so, unless you have experienced the other side of it, the boring side, it's hard to know that that's what you should be looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How necessary is it to take a break after you've been in an abusive relationship or a traumatic relationship?
I've seen people approach this in different ways. I think that a break can be very helpful. And I've seen people go, absolutely not. I'm not taking this lying down. I'm going back out and I am going to do this my way.
But don't you normally attract a similar relationship?
Sometimes, but not always. And sometimes people use those experiences to sort of reclaim something that they feel was taken from them.
Yeah, if you can make the right choices and have those boundaries right, coming out and realizing what it was that you chose that wasn't healthy for you.
Right.
And moving into the next relationship. Because when I was madly in love and I was dating this guy and it was just a terrible relationship that I just had to get out of. And I ended up going with a guy that I thought was my best friend that listened to everything and just was like that perfect guy. But that ended up being more of an abusive relationship. And that was the reason why after that, I was like, well, how did that happen? I ended up taking almost 2.5 years off because I felt like I just couldn't choose the right person after not fully healing from the initial abusive relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every single person processes things on their own timeline, right? And sometimes we don't see the pattern until it's happened multiple times.
Because you're right. I didn't even see that till years later.
Yeah. When you're looking back and going, oh, all these people had something in common. I didn't see it at the time. And so that's why I say for some people, a break makes sense because they're in that deep trauma response. They can't even conceive of being with another person. And that's valid. And so is being like, fuck that person.
Yeah.
I am not going to let this get in my way. And, we're all humans.
Yeah.
So is that process going to be perfect? No. Either way, right? Like being in your deep healing and feeling all your feelings is also messy.
Yeah, it's so messy.
We're messy people and we make mistakes. We, do jump into things too soon. And I don't want to heap any judgment on people doing that.
Yeah, no.
Because
it can work for them.
It can work as part of the process.
Yeah. So after jumping into one relationship to the next, I realized that didn't work for me. But then I took off 2 years, just like self-healing, therapy, EMDR therapy, and then getting back out in the dating world, but then realizing now that I have these boundaries, it's completely different now.
Yeah.
Now that the boundaries are the most important thing to have in dating. And then because you can see those red flags up front and then you can advocate for yourself. This is not okay with me.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to go on that second date.
That's right.
right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Yeah. And I had a wonderful date with a man the other day. And before I left, he said, well, he didn't say, text me when you get home. It was raining. I had to drive an hour away. And that just didn't sit right with me. Is that right or wrong? I don't know. But for me, and then I didn't hear from him the next day to make sure I got home or follow up.
There you go.
And so, a few days later when he wants to go out on a second date, I'm like, no way.
Right.
Because I just didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that he cared enough.
It's honestly the small human
things.
courtesies that mean the most early on in dating. And some of that may come off as corny, cheesy, whatever, don't care.
It's okay.
They matter, and they matter for both parties, no matter their gender, right? I think that those small courtesies are what we've lost. And it's also what's leaving people feeling like, they're not making progress in their dating life because they're like, isn't this just what it is? I swipe, I match, and now you're my girlfriend or whatever. It's like, no, there's some effort, and I think we've lost a little bit of that. So I totally think you deserve someone to comment on your well-being, and even if it's just one date and you do never see each other again, like, what's wrong with that?
No, I think that's important.
Follow-up question for you. Did you decide that you wanted to give yourself 2 years for some reason, or did it just end up being 2 years that you were giving yourself this process of healing?
That's a really good question. I actually think it took 2.5 years for me to examine the relationship that I was in love with that man and what went wrong, because he blamed me throughout the whole time, and I had to realize the things that he was doing, that really deeply hurt me.
Yeah.
Right. And then I chose another relationship right after that I jumped right into with someone who had seen me on a documentary. He reached out to me, who from the start didn't have good intentions with me, and took me a while to get out of that relationship. So I was just scared to death of dating another person like that one. So that was the reason why, you have that one relationship where it's like, you need time after that.
Oh, yeah. Definitely had it.
And I needed 2 years. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until the EMDR therapy for me to get to that place where I felt worthy enough, where I felt like I was innocent, and where, I wasn't, the victim. I don't want to be a victim, but I wanted to take accountability for what also I chose and why I chose that relationship, and to fully understand it before I could venture out and be healthy enough to start dating again.
Yeah.
But it's not always a healthy world of dating out there that I've realized. It's like, I went on a date with a guy, put his hand right down my shirt. I was like, why would you do that? I was like, it's completely traumatizing. Then another guy who would say, well, I like to be submissive. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he said, I like to be used and abused. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, this isn't going to happen.
Right.
Just like dealing with all these different, I'm not saying they're right or wrong. Maybe some women may like that, but they were triggers for me that I couldn't want anything to do with them after that.
Absolutely.
And that's just modern day dating.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's a smorgasbord out there, and there are people who are, trying their best, and they're mixed in with people who are trying their worst, and it's complicated, and there's almost a sense that you can't get out of it unscathed. That like dating these days is about like kind of collecting your battle scars. And in fact, like my previous relationship, I think of as my bottom relationship. Like,
really?
Your rock bottom, where you realize, or I realize, that something I'm doing is not working.
Yeah. So you realize something you're doing is not working. And that's okay, right?
Yeah. Even though I was victimized in that relationship through betrayal.
Same.
And, never thought that would ever happen to me. And in some ways, it really helped me understand why I chose people that I was choosing, maybe what I needed to do differently in my next relationships, and also like what was my intention going into this relationship? What did I think was going to happen? And I think sometimes that is so illuminating to understand, what you thought and what was actually happening were so far apart.
Oh gosh, yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's so hard to recognize when you're in it.
Yeah.
But when you're out and looking back and you have some help, maybe through friends or a therapist, you can say, oh, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, I don't know that I ever really saw what this person was doing.
Yeah, no, not what's happening.
No.
Well, I was in love with the relationship that became abusive. I was in love with him, so I could understand why I made those bad choices.
Yeah.
But then I went into a relationship where the person I was in love with, he was a good friend who had deceived me for quite a few months. And trying to get out of that relationship with someone I'm not even in love with, that was what was so painful of getting into relationships. Sometimes we're in a relationship with men we don't even want to be with.
Right.
And they have that hold on you financially or whatever it is.
Right.
Psychologically, it's different for everyone, but that's when you take a step back. I was like, I can't anymore. And I want to ask you a question about that. So let's go back to, so I'm dating now. I was on an app with a man that I really liked. He was a Danish man. I like Scandinavian men. So I was like, oh, I found like a nice guy. Had this wonderful conversation with him. And he said, okay, before we go out on this date, I just want to let you know what my sexual kinks are.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, kinks? Like, huh? You know, that naivety I have. So like, what are they? And he's like, I like to be submissive. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? And he's like, well, I like to be used and abused. So I'm just like, well, can you explain what that means? So I took that as that's not a healthy relationship that I want to be involved in, and that's fine. But do you think it's best for someone to tell you right up front what their kinks are or what they're not normal sexual things that they like are up front? Right?
Yes.
Because I appreciated the
Yes.
fact that he told me that up front, so I didn't have to go on a date with him.
100%.
So I could choose whether I wanted to go on a date because of my triggers. That wasn't going to work for me.
Right.
The relationship that just made me step back for 2 years, that man told me he was a good Christian, religious man. For months, never tried anything sexual with me, made me feel really safe. And then 4 months in, he was actual sexual deviant. He didn't tell me for 4 months what his true intentions were and what he liked sexually. And that was a major trigger for me. I don't like tools and objects. I don't like threesomes. I don't like all that stuff, but he hid that from me for 4 months. What's right and what's wrong here?
I have my version of what's right, and I write about it in my book that I think it's really important for people to be transparent about what they want sexually.
Up front.
Up front, yes. And there are apps for that. You know, Field is... it originally started as an app for people who were looking for threesomes, and then
there
they
you go.
rebranded, and they are the more sex positive and open to different types of sexual desires app. But if you're on a more traditional dating app and you match with someone, and that is a part of who you are, I do think that you owe it to your dates to let them know that side of you. So I actually think that everything that happened in your interaction went correctly, even though you didn't meet up for a date, you know? But I think that was right. That was right for both of you, because people who engage in BDSM or kink, it's not good for them if they're not with a partner who wants to be there and who's interested in that.
Yeah, and in his defense, he did say that. He did say, well, I'm not into like having anyone do anything they don't want to do, but this is just what I like sexually.
Yeah. So this is someone who maybe is not fully embracing. He knows he has to be transparent because perhaps in the past people have rejected him, but he hasn't gotten to the point of, I am solely looking for a partner who can provide this type of sexual dynamic for me. And there are going to be those people who are either dipping a toe into BDSM or kink for the first time on dating apps. There are going to be people who have experienced a tremendous amount of shame for their kinks throughout their lives. And so they're not fully embodied. I think what can sometimes happen, especially for those who were raised in conservative religious households that have very strict doctrines about what sex is and isn't, right? They can be the most sexually deviant people. because they are repressing things for so long.
So much
and
guilt.
unaware that there is a way to enact certain things. And so instead of engaging in something that feels consensual and mutual, there's almost this buildup and this tension of like, okay, well, now I've got to like release the beast, for lack of a better phrase.
Oh,
You know
boy,
what I
yeah.
mean? And like that is horrible.
Yeah, but release the beast after you've already trapped someone
right.
into a relationship.
Right.
That's thinking that you're another way.
Yes.
A good Christian boy.
Yes.
Right. And you're actually not.
Right.
It's scary.
Yeah.
Actually.
And also, what is good Christian anyway? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, let's ask that question
Well, I
for
don't
real.
know. His good Christian reading me devotionals every night wasn't what came about 4 months later. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, right. So that is really a faulty sale of goods, right? Like that is a complete betrayal.
Yeah, it was a complete betrayal.
Absolutely. Whereas your Scandinavian friend, he had a more upfront approach.
And I was so grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do hope that he finds a dominant woman to help him.
I do.
Yeah.
Are there specific steps or practices that you would encourage someone to engage with before starting to date?
Yes, absolutely. So I mentioned before that I think therapy of any kind is helpful. There have actually been studies that like the modality of therapy that someone chooses, it doesn't have as big of an impact as the patient and therapist relationship that they have. Yeah. So it's really important to find someone, regardless of their modality, who you really can connect with. Now, there are modalities of therapy that have been clinically proven to help people process trauma. EMDR that you mentioned earlier is a great one. So this is eye movement desensitization, rapid desensitization, or anyway. There is and I've experienced this myself as a patient. It's a process where you are in an environment with a therapist, talking through an experience that you had, and they're through eye movements able to almost like just, I think of it as like taking the air out of that experience for you. So it's less charged. It's less like full and present for you on an ongoing, basis. So things, for instance, that I would be preoccupied with, I no longer think about. And it's such a gift, but it could be intense for a lot of people. So that's why I sort of say, EMDR, trauma therapy, great. But if you feel like that would be too intense for you, find any therapist who you really connect with.
Yeah, the connection is the most important part.
It's the most important part, that you feel safe, right? And there are trauma-informed therapists. That would probably be a good place to start. And I love Psychology Today's website, where you can search by, the practitioner's specialties. So you can tick EMDR. You can have someone who is your same race, which is also sometimes really helpful for cultural competency reasons and understanding some of the interpersonal dynamics that may be going on with you and your previous relationships. So that's really helpful. At that point, I think, working with a therapist, you can understand your boundaries. You came out of therapy knowing, okay, this is a boundary for me. And if someone does this, it's not a good match. And that doesn't make me a bad person, doesn't make them terrible necessarily. It's just not for me, right? And being equipped to go forward into dating with that knowledge of what your boundaries are is so important. I also recommend groups. Groups are great for healing. So RAIN has resources where you can join meetups or, just find resources for other people in your area, maybe who have similar experiences.
How does that work with the groups? Because I've been wanting to try that.
Yeah,
it's like sitting in a circle and everyone tells their story.
A lot of it's online now.
Oh, it's online.
Yeah.
I like the in-person.
You can do in-person, and I have done group work, and it's all online. I actually really enjoy that. But there's groups for survivors. There's groups for children of dysfunction. So those groups actually are really helpful in understanding maybe there was abuse in childhood, right? And you're trying to heal from that and realizing that that has had a ripple effect in all of your relationships. And then you're in a group of people who all kind of understand in their own ways that they're children of dysfunction and chaos, and kind of perpetuated those patterns in all of their relationships.
Yes.
It helps you to reframe your story and feel less alone. But yeah, the groups can be based on 12-step programs, or they can be informal groups where that someone has just said, we're going to all meet and talk about our experiences. Those who want to share can, those who do not, are just free to listen.
Okay.
And that can be, listening is sometimes the best healing. So
I think
group
so
work is
too.
great. Yeah.
Listening and hearing stories that resonate with you or are similar to your story, I
Right.
feel is like the best healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I can identify, whenever you can identify, like, that was me, then it's like,
And sometimes when
feels-
it's slightly removed,
yes.
you identify different things. So for me personally, I love listening to cult podcasts because I've never
similar.
been in a cult, but I grew up in a very authoritarian household. My father was not diagnosed a narcissist, but ticks a lot of the boxes. And so growing up with that kind of abuse, he was also an alcoholic. So yeah, there's a lot of chaos growing up. And what I've found is that there are similar dynamics of control used in cults. And so even though these are not stories of coercion and manipulation that I directly understand, I can see the mechanisms behind them. So that's another thing too. I encourage people to find resources like your podcast and things that feel like they're illuminating something for you that you really needed to hear. If you leave listening from a podcast going, wow, okay, that wasn't my experience exactly, but I know someone who was in that experience, or I have flavors of that I can identify with. That's also great for healing. 100%. Connecting those dots for yourself is great. And moving forward, I think, having the support of someone like myself as a dating coach is great too. And that's when you can get support actually putting your boundaries into practice. So learning how to communicate them, it's really hard.
Sure.
It takes practice. You don't always get it right, but having someone to say, that's okay. That's great. You tried, and like, it wasn't perfect, but look at the result. They honored your boundary. That can happen, and it can happen again and again. Right. That's also something I would recommend.
Also, how important is addressing the shame?
Like, it's actually probably 99% of the challenge.
I was thinking that.
Yeah. The shame is real.
Yeah. Until I addressed my shame, transformation didn't happen until I addressed my shame.
How did you address your shame?
Oh, it was difficult.
Yeah.
That's when the tears started coming.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because it went into childhood.
Yeah.
And I had always said for like 6 months, I had a great childhood, traveled the world, I had supportive parents, all that thing. And then, the flashlight going back and forth because EMDR, it's like the eye movements going back into the childhood and those first 7 years and talking about what happened those first 7 years. And then I realized where the shame was really coming from and where a lot of my decisions through life was really coming from.
Yeah.
When I kind of thought it was early 20s with Jeffrey Epstein and, I probably had some things to do with that, but what came before that?
Right. Yeah. Well, and the things that I've learned about how Jeffrey chose people is that he really did look for people with vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, that was a perfect target at that time.
And number one, we are all vulnerable. I don't want anyone to feel like there are people who are more predisposed, but there are those of us who maybe came from chaos, who don't understand stability or see stability as boring. We kept using that word, but I'm like, it's just stability, honestly. It's just
but a lot of the times they look for someone who doesn't have a prominent father figure.
Yeah.
Who's daily in your life.
Right. And that is something that people seek out. And there are plenty of men who are looking to fill that role and not in healthy ways.
No.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think that that's that's where, you can really get into shedding that layer of shame. Like, you didn't have a choice what happened to you when you were younger, and you didn't have a choice even operating with the survival mechanisms that you acquired, getting yourself through childhood and becoming ensnared in someone else's version of abuse later on. It's not your fault. And our culture wants us to believe that there are just victims and you're predisposed to victimhood. And where we should be putting our resources is protecting children,
Absolutely.
and understanding the mechanisms of abuse, and that typically, abusers have been abused, and intervening in those cycles of abuse on a family level would save so many people heartache, grief, and shame.
That's well said.
Thank you.
So connecting with the body.
Yes.
When somebody's body is harmed through sexual violence or assault, it's really hard to connect to the body. How would you recommend we go about doing that? You said pleasure starts with your own relationship to your body. So learning what feels good and what is a potential trigger for you is crucial to rebuilding a solid sexual connection to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I see again with people who haven't experienced trauma. Bodies in and of themselves are not neutral in our culture. It's not you have a body and I have a body and okay, great,
Right.
as much as, all of the kids' books in the like 70s and 80s that we grew up with wanted us to believe. A lot of us grow up with ideas about what is okay in terms of pleasure and experience for ourselves. And that's, I mean, every time we start talking about this, we come back to shame. Whether you grew up in a religious household that told you that masturbation was a sin, or you just absorbed messaging around you that women are supposed to be, polite and quiet and agreeable to whatever a man wants to do with you. We all internalize certain things about what our bodies are for and what is okay for us to do. So if I had a magic wand right now, I would wave it to allow everyone to experience what a completely shame-free experience in their bodies would be like. And I think that would give people permission to explore their bodies more, through a neutral lens. Like, this feels good, this feels bad. I don't like this, I do like this. But what will often happen is people will start to explore because they're like, my religious upbringing be damned. I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to learn how to masturbate, right? And this is mostly for women. A lot of young men grow up with different messages around this and can have a bit more confidence. Not to say that it's not associated with shame before, during, or after, but for a lot of women, they don't even touch themselves until maybe young adulthood.
Yeah, or until someone else does it.
Or until someone else does it. Yeah, for sure. And they're like, whoa, okay.
And they don't even know what they like,
Right. So to make that leap to understand one's body is often very difficult. And it's not neutral. They may feel pleasure and then feel guilty for that pleasure.
But what does the guilt come from? Is that mostly religious?
It's just from our culture. We live in a very sex negative culture, specifically for women, which says that, women aren't even supposed to like sex. It's not for you.
Really?
What are you talking about?
Still?
I mean, a lot of people have that message still ingrained.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That more often than not, when I work with women, they tell me that the majority of the sexual experiences that they had were not about them. That the position
I can see that.
that the position that they took on without even thinking about it was to be givers of pleasure and to be receivers of whatever came from that, but to never ask more, to never want more, and to never know that there could be more.
Or just to feel safe and comfortable with the person you're with.
Yeah. Well, there's that too. I mean, sometimes people feel safe and comfortable being of service, right?
Okay, yeah.
When you,
but as long as it's healthy.
That's the role. I think it just comes back to self-denial.
Okay.
So yes, you can be happy being in a role of service to someone forever and ever and never experiencing what your body can give you. But I think that's also because you've probably
Like condition yourself
conditioned yourself to be okay with that.
But won't that manifest in different ways, unhealthy ways in your body?
Absolutely.
Because you're denying what you truly want for yourself.
Yes.
Just to please somebody else.
I just wrote about this in my newsletter, that there are studies that women in particular have higher rates of chronic disease, heart disease, and immune suppressive diseases because of our self-silencing. Yes, this is real. This is actually real. However, I think someone who's been that conditioned, if they develop an autoimmune disease, they're not going to necessarily go back and think it's because I repress my orgasms.
Yeah, of course.
They're not necessarily thinking that. It can be all connected or like a factor, right? And so I've watched so many women come in with that idea of sex isn't for me, or it's never been for me. I want it to be. I don't know how it can be. And watch them go through this arc of, okay, I love sex and I'm able to ask for the things that I want. And my partner has never heard that from me and is actually excited about it. They want to participate in my pleasure. And I never knew that would be true. So yeah. I fear I've drifted off to a different topic.
So, then within dating, is that looking for someone who already gets that, or is it?
It's partly
training or teaching someone to understand.
It's doing it simultaneously, right? It's like learning for yourself. What do I like, and being brave enough to explore that with someone else. To say the hard thing. To not let a moment pass where you're, instead of advocating for your own pleasure, you're holding back and just hoping that someone else will read your mind and get the message telepathically.
That doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work. And something that I like to point out to people is that's true for everything in life. But sex, we really want to believe that there's some special magic to it, that we don't have to use our words. It's really important to understand that we do. We do have to use our words and we do have to advocate. Even if someone says, no, I'm not into that. Okay.
So then you're basically saying in the dating process or getting to know someone that you feel like you can have a connection with, it's important to talk about it before.
I'm a big fan of talking about sex before you even have sex. I think it's one of the best aphrodisiacs even. To be having a conversation with someone where you're developing a vibe with them and then you're like, listen, let's just lay it all out here. Like, this is the kind of person I am. This is the kind of sexual person I am. And here are some experiences that I want to explore.
Right.
And you get to gauge whether or not that person is down to meet you in that vulnerability.
Especially if you have traumas or triggers. I think it's important. I started doing that, just bringing it up. I feel like guys are like, okay, we're talking about this already?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because, not that we need to weed it out, but I need to know, because I think everyone has, especially as you're getting a little older or maybe even younger, kids, 20s these days, they kind of know what they like. And it's not even just like, okay, we're together and we're going to figure this out together. It's already I know what I like because I've been watching porn for the last 5, 10, 20 years. And this is what I like. So it's like you want to bring that into a relationship. And not everyone is okay with what you like.
Right. And it's important to know that going into a sexual experience.
So it's important in dating to bring this up in the first couple dates.
I think it can be.
How do you bring it up though?
I think it can be really natural. I think that, I've had clients who have said things like, I'm a really sexual person and I need to feel safe with somebody before I do that.
Okay.
So it's kind of expectation setting, right? Where it's like, look, it might take me a little while to warm up to you and we might not be having sex on date 3 or whatever, but just know I am a really sexual person. And it can be as simple as that, that's, to me, it's still a conversation about sex, but that kind of expectation setting is also boundary setting. And for a lot of my clients, again, whether they've had trauma or not, they do want to take their time with sex. And in this day and age, it can feel like you're automatically disqualifying yourself from dating if that's how you want to approach it. But time and time again, I have seen people state that boundary up front and have someone be very respectful of it. So it's actually quite heartening to me to see that there are still men out there who are like also cool with taking their time and easing into that part of the relationship.
Yeah, I think most men are
Yeah.
open to taking more time.
Yeah.
What is the yes, no, maybe list?
Oh, this is great. So, I mean, this is for like your advanced viewers and listeners.
Okay.
If they are ready to, maybe they're like in a relationship and they want to know a little bit more, but they're not quite sure how to have a conversation. A yes, no, maybe list is a list of sexual activities. And there are like PG ones, and then there are like X-rated ones that you can find online. There are even apps for this that you can both, log in, share your account, and see where you line up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is, it kind of takes the pressure off of the in-person. You can just see the things that you align on and go.
So is that just choosing what you like?
Yeah.
They're choosing what they like and see if you are aligned.
Right, exactly.
Like if I'm like, absolutely no toys.
Right.
They're like, toys are a must for me.
Toys are a yes.
So
then you can talk about why. So what I love about a yes, no, maybe is that it doesn't just end with the yes or no, right? There's a maybe, and I love the discussion that maybe inspires. I love the discussion of, oh, you're a yes and I'm a no. Can you tell me more about why that's a no for you?
Okay.
So it invites a lot more in-depth conversation. And I've used yes, no, maybe list for couples who have a hard time communicating. And I've, sent them through the okay, we're talking about kissing and touching and maybe oral sex and all those things, and giving and receiving and all of that. And it's a little more tame. And then they're like, okay, send us the like hardcore one, which originally that was its function, was for BDSM practitioners or people who were exploring BDSM relationships, to say, okay, well, we've agreed that we're into, bondage, submission, discipline, sadomasochism. We're on the same page there, but what are the areas that we overlap in terms of our interest? And that could be everything from, being tied down to gags to, leather, masks,
being
and
strangled.
all kinds of things. Yeah, breath play is kind of the term that's used.
Okay.
But choking.
Oh, is it called choking?
Yeah,
Okay.
choking. So there's an opportunity again to have a conversation, a dialogue around, where do our interests align. What you'll find too is, I mean, most people who are kinky have a pretty solid idea of like what their kink is.
Right.
Like,
Okay. I would think so.
Baked into the idea of kink is that it's a pretty specific thing. And so again, I come back to, most people want someone who is a willing participant and who understands that this can be fun for both of you. So for instance, and I've worked with clients where this is the case, someone has a foot fetish and the other partner is like, I'll engage with you on it every once in a while, but it's not really my thing.
Right.
It can cause tension and friction in the relationship.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah.
So that would be good to
know right out of the gate.
Right out the gate.
So, print it out, take it on your first dates.
Oh my goodness, this is crazy that we have to do this. But it's so important, I think, for people who come from trauma. Don't most people who come from trauma have triggers that they're just like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. Okay.
Yeah. And for some people, those are physical triggers. Sometimes it's emotional, right? Psychological.
What does an
triggers.
Emotional one look like?
An emotional one is like, I guess emotional is maybe not the right way of putting it, but the way things are said, right?
Okay.
Certain phrases that perhaps were used in coercive or abusive relationships in the past, you might have partners who say that flippantly.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, why the fuck did you just say that to me?
Yeah.
Right? It takes you back to that place, that other person's words, and all you're thinking about is what they meant to that person and what that person was trying to do.
Right.
But on the surface, it's just a phrase. It's just a word.
Sure. Yeah, I remember with the sexual deviant, with that first night together and wanting to bring out toys, that never discussed that that's what he liked. And then when I wasn't a willing participant in what he wanted to do, he was just like, well, then can we just have threesomes? And I remember being so triggered by that. It just bothered me. Like all night, I was like staring at the ceiling all night because I was like, why would you say that? You know, we're supposed to be in a relationship, like going towards marriage. And then if I'm not what you want sexually, it's like, let's just have threesomes so that the other person can provide that for me.
Just throwing that out there.
It was just thrown out there just like that.
Right.
Like it was nothing, so nonchalant. And I remember it was like the end of the relationship that I couldn't get out of for another year, but it was like, it was horrible. And I remember even telling my family about it. Like, I don't want to be with this person because, you know, he wants threesomes. He wants to do all these things. Oh, just put up with it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, no, this is like a no for me.
Yeah.
And it was like, they wanted you just to put up for it. You know, this guy's going to take care of you. He's wealthy. He's going to take care of your kids. Like, but I don't want to do these things sexually. And a lot of people, like you were just saying, they're just like, a woman is supposed to be submissive and just put up with whatever the man wants.
Yeah.
You know?
I've had the experience of working with couples where, and this is just sort of piggybacking off of the feedback that you got when you were trying to express, this isn't going to work for me. I've worked with quite a few couples who had sought out counseling through their church when they've had a sexual issue. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes the person who's working within the church actually does have a really solid sexology background. So I don't want to diss this experience whole cloth. But more times than not, if it's a heterosexual couple and they go see, you know, seek out religious counseling for a sexual issue, the woman will be told what you were told.
Yeah.
And that even comes down to kissing. You know, I had a client who really was like, I want to be kissed more. And, you know, their advisor was just like, you're just going to have to live with the fact that your husband doesn't like that.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened. Because we went to go see a pastor.
Oh, wow.
And the pastor was just like, just put up with whatever and work through his sexual things. But I was supposed to just put up with it.
Yeah.
Like nobody could understand that wasn't okay with me.
Right.
And he also didn't like kissing at all. Like who's in a relationship who doesn't like kissing? Like for me, that's everything. But the person did not like kissing at all. And it was just like, the pastor was just like, no, the woman's just supposed to do whatever the man wants to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, that again, I could just keep going back to, that's the dominant cultural narrative.
That needs to change. I'm sorry.
It does. It absolutely does. Women should feel like they are active participants in their sex life.
Yeah.
They should feel that their partner wants to give them as much pleasure as their partner receives
real
from
intimacy.
them. Yeah, I do think that that is real intimacy, because sometimes we do things that we don't like in the, you know, interest of our partners feeling wanted and needed and desired in their relationship.
As long as you feel safe, though.
Sure, sure. But I'm talking about like the reciprocity from male partners, right? Like you might do things, tasks around the house that you don't love doing, you know, like in the bedroom too. Like it's really important to like think about the ways in which we're just accepting that, okay, in that context, it's just what men want, right? Yeah. It just blows my mind.
But there's also ways of like, if you're in a loving, safe environment, to ease into some of the things you might like.
Yes. Yes. I think it's a
not
conversation.
It has to be like a hard no.
Right.
But when it's just thrown at you after you're thinking somebody's one way and they're definitely thinking way deviantly on another way, it's like, that's not healthy.
Yeah.
But if you do want your woman to like slowly ease into certain things that you want to try, I mean, there's a healthy way to do it.
And I believe it begins with a conversation outside of a sexual context.
Exactly. It's
I
not
think
in
it's
the bedroom.
so important. Yeah. And we have all of these listicles that are like 10 ways to spice up your life, your sex life. And, you know, it's like toys, lingerie, all these things. And honestly, the way to spice up your sex life is to talk about it.
Over a glass of wine at dinner. Like
talk about it. You know, it's going to bring up a lot, but even that emotional vulnerability, it's a turn on. You know, that you have the safety of saying, this is what I honestly think about our sex life. This is what I like about it. This is what I don't like about it. You know, this is where I think we align. This is where I think we diverge. And that's okay. I want to acknowledge all of it and also talk about what our plan for the future might be. It's important.
That's easier said than done, I think.
Yeah, but I watch people do it all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I would love to be in a relationship where I could do that.
I want that for
You
you.
know, I would love to just really talk about it.
Yeah.
And I find that a lot of men are very conservative and they just don't even want to speak about it.
Yes. And they're missing out. They're missing an
Yeah.
opportunity. And what I have also seen is that in every relationship, if there's someone who is willing to go there and be the one who initiates the conversation, often there will be an openness. Sometimes it gets shut down, but sometimes people just need a leader.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to do it, and they need someone else to sort of show them.
Right.
So you can be the leader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is a self-pleasure routine?
A self-pleasure routine is anything that is centered completely on your own sexual pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So for some people, that might be I set aside time to masturbate. And what does that look like for me? Well, I need to get in a good headspace. So I'm going to read a romance novel. I'm going to, maybe watch a spicy TV show or some porn. I'm going to settle in. I'm going to either focus on my, manual stimulation, like just using my hands, or I'm going to break out the toys that I enjoy. But I do think of it as a practice. I think of it as something that can help us to connect to that part of ourselves on a more consistent basis, whether or not we have a partner. Some people completely let that side of themselves go when they're single because they're like, oh, well, I'll wait until I have a partner. And that might be years,
are you saying that's unhealthy?
It can be healthy if that's your choice.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But I think that for people who think that partnered sex is the end all be all and they have a lot of guilt or shame around self-pleasure, that's an area to work on because I think they can definitely derive a lot of pleasure from having a practice of, self-pleasure. Yeah.
Is it important to have an emergency plan when you're triggered?
Yes. Yes. And this is something that my clients are usually pretty good at thinking through. And it can look different for each person. So an emergency plan involves knowing that you may be triggered with a partner. There may be things that you want from that partner in that moment, whether that's comforting, whether that's, words of affirmation or just
in the moment
being, or that's, I need to step out of this situation. I need to remove myself and let this person be by themselves. So
but that only happens usually if you haven't spoken about what your triggers are prior.
Well, the emergency plan means that you have talked to your partner about your triggers. And then you've also discussed, like, if and when I get triggered, here's what it may look like. I might go quiet because I'm dissociated. So you may feel me actually kind of leave. I've gotten feedback, not in a sexual context, but people are like, yeah, I know when you dissociate.
Okay.
Somebody might not be aware of that. So the emergency plan might not be in the moment exactly, but afterwards it could be someone saying, I dissociated during sex and here's what happened that I think might be the cause of that.
And dissociation means checking out.
Just completely being out of your body, and not in sexological terms, there's being out of your body and kind of watching yourself, which is called spectatoring. And that's more of an anxiety response. Dissociating is a protective response. It's like, I don't want to be here. It's not safe for me to be here. I'm going to go. And it's something that a lot of survivors have to work through in not just their sexual lives, but in their, lives at large.
So how important is pleasure in our journeys of healing after sexual violence and abuse?
It's really important. And I think that some of the work is learning what your boundaries are to create a safe space to experience pleasure. Because so many of us do not have the right container to experience pleasure. We think we do, but then realize, well, if this had been different, I think I could have let go. Could have let my guard down. So it's really important to talk with partners about what you might need for a sexual experience to feel its best.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that does come back to having those conversations about triggers, about what to do when triggers happen. But it's also about understanding yourself and rooting into a moment, which can be quite difficult. We have 5 senses, and they're all capable of experiencing pleasure, like helping us experience pleasure. So that's a really good hack for anybody who is like, I don't know, like it's very difficult for me to be in the moment and I do dissociate often. The antidote to dissociation is usually something physical, focusing in on the actual sensations that you're feeling, and recognizing when you can ask for adjustments. So it's like, that feels good, but this would feel better, please.
Okay.
You know, that's really important
So
too.
talking through it in the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Big fan of talking about sex before, during, and after.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because during is the hardest part, right?
For some
most people struggle with.
Some people love talking about sex during, not necessarily giving sexual feedback, but dirty talk is fun for them, or like they can be like, oh yes, more of that, please. So I've found that people find it more difficult to talk about sex before and after.
Oh, really? Than during? Okay.
That feels a little vulnerable. There are some people that I work with who are a bit more on the shy side, that they're just like, I don't speak during sex. I don't even really moan, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, we need to work on that.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's good to be in your body enough that you allow some of those feelings to just take over you.
Right. Well, because most people, like the partner of the person you're speaking of, would have a hard time saying, I want you to speak up a little bit, or moan, or let me know you're feeling it, and like, you know, feeling good.
Yeah.
So, from both sides. So I think it's difficult.
It's good to have that feedback.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
So how can someone better understand or discover compatibility when their dating relationship history is filled with a lot of coercion, manipulation, or abuse?
Yeah, I think compatibility is hard for most of us, right? So let's just start there.
That's the base, right?
Yeah. And then going into dating when you have a history of assault, it means that you're probably going to be more on guard. And
definitely so.
That can be protective and helpful, you know? I think that at the very beginning, you're going to be looking out and probably more hypervigilant around types of behavior, things that somebody says, the way that they're treating you in those first couple of dates, and assessing for safety. And that is normal. And that is what it's going to take for you to get into a place where you can start letting your guard down. A really beautiful thing that a friend of mine told me once is that she was asked, like, how did you know your partner was the one? And she said, well, I don't, aside from the fact that I don't believe in the one, I just was waiting for him to disappoint me, and he never did.
Aw, I kind of like that.
Me too.
Yeah.
It was a really great, I had to reflect on that myself and think about the ways in which we enter into relationships. Sure, we want to be open-hearted to someone, but we also do have our guard up. And we hope that in that process of getting to know someone, we begin to trust that they can hold all of us. They can hold the good, the bad, the past that they probably don't want to hear about, you know? But it's all part of us.
I think it's so good to have your guard up. That's your protection.
Yeah. Not to the degree that you lose out, you
know.
know?
But still, are you losing out on someone that could possibly be a bad relationship?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So sometimes in the beginning, I feel like just looking for those red flags. Maybe I'm the annoying one, but like I want to see those red flags up front. I'm looking for them, you know?
Yeah.
Just little things that make me, and it all comes down to feeling safe.
Yes. And that's another thing too, I think that's really important. A lot of times survivors have been through a process of grooming that keeps them disconnected from their own sense of safety. So it's not that we don't have that in us innately. It's that someone has told us that that was wrong. That gut
Right.
feeling that we got. No,
Yeah.
no, that's absolutely not what's going on here. You're
No.
mistaken,
Well,
right?
especially if you're like kind of trusting or a little naive and like
Sure.
you see the good in people.
Yeah.
You know, you want to believe, oh, that was just one time.
Right.
I'll go on another date and like, oh, doesn't happen for a few dates, but you saw the red flag literally from the first or second date.
Yeah. So it's really important to trust how you feel. And in fact, that's what I like to get my clients to think about is how they want to feel in their next relationship.
Yes, exactly.
To really envision what safety might feel like in their bodies. If you can start to imagine what a typical day with this person might be and look like, it's not so much that you have an idea of their height, their weight, their race, you know, but you have a sense of how you feel with them. And if you don't have a lot of experiences that are positive with people that you've dated, think about someone in your life who you do trust and think about what it would be like to be with someone with those characteristics in a romantic capacity.
Yeah.
I think that's a really helpful framing of, you know, moving forward in dating. How do you want to feel? And if you have those positive examples, it can be like this, you know,
Yeah.
they really make me feel heard. They really make me feel like they are listening and they want me to open up and share with them. And I feel safe doing so.
To create a list or not to create a list, that is the question.
Yeah.
In conversations around manifestation or abundance, often we're advised to write a list of exactly what we want and begin to visualize this person coming into our life. Is this helpful or harmful when it comes to starting to date again? Before you answer, I just want to say when I create my list, it's positive things that I want and not focusing on the negative.
Yes, that's great. Yeah.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah, I feel of two minds about lists.
Okay.
One, I think they can be helpful, especially if you're coming out of toxic situations. And if the only thing you can get out onto paper or in a notes app is, I don't want this particular behavior, start there because you can always look back and think what the positive side of that is.
Right.
You know, you don't want someone who's manipulative, so you want someone who honors your free will. You know, like that's just the opposite of that. Someone who is like, yeah, you want to do this? Great. I have no judgment about that. You know, I'm not going to stand in your way or try to make you be anything that you're not. Right. Where I think lists get tricky is when people do put things down that actually do limit the possibilities for them, because we don't exist in a vacuum. You know, we come from cultures, backgrounds. We're influenced by our politics, everything that can sometimes put blinders on to certain people and exclude them from the, you know, being potentially great partners for us. So
or like he has to be 6'2".
Yeah, exactly.
You could meet a guy who's 5'11". He could be amazing. And you're like, oh, not on the list.
I say it all the time. 6'2" is not a personality.
No.
Sorry. It's just not. So I think that it's important to, again, just root into how one might feel.
Right.
So if you use that as your basis and you're not looking at those more superficial qualities, I think it can be helpful, especially as a survivor, because you have these experiences with toxicity and you need to be looking for something different. And in order for you to look for something different, you have to name what that different thing is. Otherwise, it's very easy to fall back into the pattern.
Yeah, which is why it's important to write the list.
Yeah, I think it can be helpful.
Yeah, the mind and the connection of writing something down sticks with you more.
Yes,
so.
yeah.
And then you can identify that. Like when you're on a date, you can't be like, oh, I don't want someone who's manipulative. How do you figure that out?
Yeah.
But wanting someone who, you know, gives you free will, like you said, is a little easier to spot.
And take stock after each date. You know, how did you feel with this person? I know some people trigger that people pleasy side in me, and I feel like I'm putting on a show instead of fully showing up as myself. And for me, that is a little bit of a flag.
Yeah, it is a flag. When you're kind of becoming what they like or want.
Right. But if I feel deeply like I got to show up as me and I wasn't feeling this pressure to be anything but that, That's a good sign.
Yeah, to me, that's most important.
Yeah.
Yeah, being my authentic self.
Yeah.
You know, being corny or funny or goofy, whatever it is that you
Mhm.
have these natural tendencies. If you can't be that natural person around someone, he's probably not the right person for
Yeah,
you.
I agree.
Only for so long we can pretend, you know, have that mask on. We're all perfect.
Right.
You know?
And the tricky thing is too, is like that person is not connecting with you. And so are you really connecting with that person's authentic side as
Yeah.
well? Like it's a double-edged sword when we find ourselves in that position.
Yeah, that's so true. So in your book, this is supposed to be fun. You discuss dating mantras, which I think are really important. So in your words, what is a dating mantra?
A dating mantra is a word or a phrase or even a song lyric. You know, if it's hard for you to think of something on your own, that sort of guides the experience that you want to have in dating. So, I mean, I give an example of like, I want dating to feel fun, which is actually kind of the mantra that I had before I met my partner. You know, it could be that for survivors, something like, you know, may I be safe in dating? You know, may I feel safe in dating? That can be this mantra and help you come back to that sense of, I need to feel safe. Do I feel safe? No. You know, okay, well, that's the whole point here. That's what we're trying to do. I don't feel safe. And then thinking about why you know, why certain experiences elicit that sense of safety and others don't. I mean, the healing process continues on. You know, it doesn't begin and end in therapy. It really does extend into the process of trying to find the person that you're going to be with next.
Yes, and focusing on that too.
Yeah.
Because that was one of my big things when I started dating. It's like, I'm starting to get out and I wanted just to have fun. But then it was just like, I just went all these super fun dates, you know, fancy restaurants and hot cars and just like, you know, all this fun stuff. But then like, it was super empty, you know, because like, what is after that? Like, how can you build off of just fun? So maybe you want fun, but it has to be also, what are the other things that you're looking for that makes you feel safe or heard, you know,
well,
that can
also,
actually lead to a relationship.
But also, what is your definition of fun? You know?
Well, I thought that was my definition. But to me, after 5 dates of that, it was like not fun anymore.
Yeah. Right. So then it's time for a new approach, you know, a new guiding phrase, you know, something that's going to encompass this next phase of dating for you. And it could be about more authentic connection.
Yeah. Yeah, which in hindsight is actually more fun when it's actually a connection where you're feeling heard, right? So a lot of times in dating, you don't really feel heard. No one's really listening to what you have to say and really getting to know you.
Yeah.
You have to look for that person who really wants to get to know you.
Yeah, there is a tendency sometimes on dates to feel more like it's an interview and you're just trying to...
I don't like that.
Both people are just trying to look good instead of find commonality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I started putting no dinner dates.
It's a long commitment.
Yeah, go hiking. Go hiking. Or I don't know, do something
else.
Yeah, just something else besides sitting there over dinner, asking question after question after question.
So for me, my fun is like, was exactly like my first date, which was a meal. But it was a pop-up that a friend of mine had done. And you know, it's a small menu, and I knew right away I was going to like my partner because he messaged me and asked if we don't get along, could he still stay and enjoy the food? And I said, yes, but you'll have to go to a different table. But he did not go to a different table. And we went to a bar after that. And I definitely went home with him on a first date. And I definitely had sex with him. And it was definitely great.
Yeah.
And to me, that was what I was looking for. I was looking for
the spark.
Ease.
Oh, ease.
Because I didn't feel a spark.
Oh,
and
really?
I am a big, actually, like, skeptic of the spark.
Yeah.
The spark had gotten me nowhere.
Yeah, the spark gets you nowhere.
No. What I needed was someone, and here's another thing that he did, which was unusual and so wonderful to me, was even in the app, because I'd messaged him first, he was like, thanks so much for reaching out first. I know that's not easy.
Oh, yeah.
And it was an acknowledgement of, hey, we're both in this process. We both know it's kind of bullshit and hard. And I see you.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to have fun with this guy.
Yeah.
And
Well,
to this day.
a sense of humor really helps too.
Yeah. And he's got a great sense of
Mhm.
humor. We, and to this, like, we bond over food. That first date needed to be gustatory.
Yeah,
and
for
it
sure.
was.
I bond over food too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really important.
Yeah.
I went on a date once and the guy was like, just out of the gate, I'm not a foodie. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is not going to work.
Oh boy.
Because I bond over food and love, going to different restaurants and trying different cuisines and
yeah, you live to eat, don't eat to live.
Yeah. So is having sexual values or ethics important? Or is that similar to an ideal partner list?
So this is supposed to be fun, I talk about sexual values. And I had come up with a list of values that I found were really helpful to share with clients. And that's why it made it into the book, because I think even in dating, we should be thinking about what we value sexually, what makes sex really good for us, all of us. If we were all thinking about this, we would all have amazing sex every single time. I'm convinced of it. But unfortunately, when we think about values, we think about family values, we think about maybe relationship values, maybe. But sexual values are not something that is commonly discussed. And I think that it's helpful to know actual words to describe, because there's so much around sex that's shrouded in mystery, and you're supposed to just know when you know. And there is all this pressure to go along because, like, first time you have sex with someone, it's going to be a little weird and awkward anyway. So, like, who cares? But you should care, right?
Yeah.
You should care about the kind of experience that you want to create for yourself and with a partner or partners. And again, this is just not something that people are given space to do. So oftentimes when people complete a sexual values assessment, they then have at least seven keywords that sum up what makes sex the best possible that it can be. And
7 keywords that are individual.
They're individual. And having, number one, people are like, oh, I have to narrow it down. That's like the hardest part, because there's so many things that they would like to express. But having a limit means that those are really potent words for you.
Can you give examples of those words?
So respect, reciprocity. Some people feel like they want their sexual expression to be reflective of their community, right? If you're like, gay, lesbian, trans, non-binary, like you're like, asexual. So this is like, I'm enacting this from a place of like, I'm a member of this community. Some people really value kink. They really value submission. They really value playfulness, excitement, spontaneity. So those are just some examples. And this actually came out of my digging into my own values after my experience of betrayal. And after that happened, I wrote on a Post-it note, I was like, love, honesty, respect, and I think something else, but I can't remember. And I put it on the refrigerator and I was like, this is what I expect from now on. And if you can't give it to me, then fuck off.
Right.
And he didn't. So fucked off. So yeah, it was something that felt deeply personal to me and grounding. And then I also felt like it was something that when people started doing this investigation, they were able to have better and more productive conversations about sex as well. So I think it's very important.
So those deal breakers?
It's not deal breakers. So for instance, I give it to couples to explore what their sexual values are individually, and then they share them with each other. Oftentimes there's a lot of overlap, but the point is not to have the exact same values.
Oh, really? Not to have the same? Okay.
You don't have to.
Okay. But then there needs to be some overlap.
Yeah. And usually there is. If they're a couple that's been together for a while,
Yeah, there's got to be some overlap.
There's some. And so someone might say, playfulness, and the other one might say silliness or something like that. But it's like, okay, well, what's playful? The point is, I think language is so potent when you apply it to sex. It just takes some of the mystery away and breaks it down into something that we can all understand, which is, when I'm being sexual with someone, I need to feel reciprocity. This is not just about you. This is not just about me.
Yeah.
It's a shared experience.
Yeah.
So if there's no reciprocity, I'm going to comment on that because you know that's a value of mine. If you don't come to the table and we have a reciprocal experience, then, you know, that's going to fall short for me. And it just helps to sort of frame what's happening a little better for people and give them words to give feedback or to talk through maybe what was good about an experience or what was not good about an experience. Instead of just being like, I didn't like that. And then someone saying, what didn't you like? And then you going, I don't know. Because that happens a lot.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because people don't know what to say. They just don't.
But is it important to have deal breakers? Like if reciprocity is like something that I have to have and that person's not willing to do that? Or...
Well, then it's a conversation, right? So reciprocity is a good example because what does that mean? Does it mean within one session?
Right.
We have reciprocity. So if I go down on you, you go down on me. Maybe it means that from session to session, we have a reciprocity.
Right.
Where we have kind of an impromptu session that's just focused on you.
Right.
And then we have another that's focused on me. And the only time I'm really upset by our sex life is when I feel there's an imbalance. When I'm looking back and going, you know what? Like the last month has really been just about you.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I'm getting my needs met.
Right.
So again, I think that it's important to have sexual deal breakers. And I think those have more to do with like, you like something that I will never like.
Right.
And so I will never engage with you on that. That's a hard boundary for me. And it may even determine whether or not I want to be in this relationship with you. Right.
And then it's also the other person being super honest, how important that is to them.
Yeah.
Because if it's really important and they tell you it's not, they could go behind your back to get it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to talk about those major deal breakers, I think.
Absolutely. If something is so necessary for you in a relationship, you've got to communicate that. That's also really important because it's unfair to put that on someone. And then if you don't get the answer that you want, you decide, okay, well, that was a deal breaker for me. So I've got to, you know, outside of the rules of our relationship, because some couples will open their relationship to accommodate for different sexual needs.
Right.
It's not a deal breaker for the relationship. It's a deal breaker for their sexual connection with each other.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
I've had a couple guests on that will just said just to please their partner, they would just start doing everything the partner wanted, but they didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a situation we want to avoid.
Absolutely. It's the best sex, in my opinion, is sex that both people feel like they're getting their needs met. And if someone is feeling obligated to do something that they don't want to do with a partner, to me, that would fall in the category of not great sex.
Speaking of past guests, we've heard some real horror stories from past guests who went on dating apps looking for love and relationship. For those of us who are interested in dating but don't want to get on a dating app, where do you recommend we meet people?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that couples today are still largely not starting from dating apps. So what does that mean? That means people are meeting each other out in the world. And that feels difficult the older that we get, because if you're not in school or, you know, working from an office even, then it can feel difficult to have a sense that you're meeting new people and connecting with them. So what I recommend for people to do is often turn to their existing community first. You know, for a lot of people, if they are survivors and they've been taking a like dating break, they might need to tell their community, hey, like kind of coming into a space where I want to date again. And if you know anybody who's single and you think they'd be a good fit, you know, community connections are really great.
I would think those are the best way.
It's the best way. And if that's not available to you, or everyone's like, I don't know anybody that I would recommend for you, then think about things out in the world that you'd like to do on a consistent basis that you know you can commit to, whether that's going to the gym, a particular class every week, or a specific time every week.
Or like meetup groups.
Yeah, and meeting up. Yeah. But making yourself a regular someplace is really helpful. It's a lot easier to introduce yourself to a stranger who you've seen a few times
Right.
than it is to just like be walking around or on the subway and be like, I find this person attractive, right? So those are the kinds of connections that we really have been losing more and more by becoming more entrenched on our phones. You know, meeting people out in the wild is just harder because people are distracted. It's
Well, yeah.
like a practical concern. that
Especially if you're
people-
home all the time. Yeah. You're
Yeah.
not
Well,
meeting
number
anyone.
one, people are home, but
Yeah.
number two, when you're out, everyone's on their phone.
Yeah, true.
So,
And men are scared to approach women.
and women are scared to approach men.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah.
But I think, like, again, it becomes easier if you see people over and over and over again. I even tell people, like, work from a coffee shop like the same time every week, even if you like you're a work from home girly, but like just get out and go to the same place every day. Or
because the guy who likes you or the girl who likes you will show up. If they see you're there at a certain time, they might come back another day.
There's that.
Expecting you to be there another time.
People want to do that.
Yeah.
And they are hoping. I think most people working from a cafe are kind of hoping that somebody will approach them, or, that they'll have a kind of meet cute out in the world.
Yeah.
More people are wanting to meet in real life than online.
Oh, yeah.
And we just need to get back into the practice of getting through those awkward moments of, hi, my name is, I've seen you here a few times. What do you do? Those kind of questions. And like, those aren't the most like flirtatious questions, but they open a door and they're easy. They're low stakes. I have only had one client who has been absolutely comfortable asking somebody if they're single, and she will do it. And it's really, yeah, it's mind blowing to me, but she's the only one who, after chatting someone up for like 5 minutes, she'll be like, are you single?
Wow.
But so if you feel brave, if you feel bold like her, feel free to do it.
I've never been able to do that.
Yeah. But yeah, those questions are just good entry level, open the conversation.
Because if you don't do that, I mean, usually the other person's not going to, you can talk to them for a long time. A lot of times they won't even ask you out.
Yeah.
And they may want to, but they're kind of like scared to.
Yeah. And if they are in a relationship, you just made their day because someone outside of their partnership found them attractive. Not the worst thing in the world.
No, definitely not. So what are some red flags we should be aware of when on a dating app?
I mean, so many, right? Okay. It's not an entirely red flag for someone to not have any details in their profile. I just think it's lazy.
Okay.
And I think we should all be doing better.
Okay.
So this is my just PSA to anyone out there that
details on the bio.
Details in the bio, please.
Like what?
Who are you?
Okay.
What are you here for? Why are you here?
Yeah.
I want to know. They want to know. And 9 times out of 10, when I've worked with clients, they are interested in someone who says something that resonates with them in their profile, that they can't believe, oh my God, we have this in common, or we have, this shared interest. And it's not just about your interests. It's about the specificity of your interests. I never want to read another profile that says that people like music, for instance.
Yeah.
Because everyone likes music. And I say in the book that if you don't like music, if you hate music, put that in your profile because that's unique. That's something that not many people say.
Yeah.
So think of the things that make you you. And I also work with clients who are like, I'm boring. And then talk about your boring life. I guarantee you're not as boring as you think you are.
Right.
As long as you're specific about it. You watch a lot of TV. Okay, what kind? You listen to a lot of music. What kind? You go to shows. What kind?
Right,
I want to know because those are the things that people can latch onto. In terms of red flags, though, the real red flags are.
What?
I'm thinking of all these things that are like.
Shoot them off.
Okay.
I want to hear them.
So someone who rushes into a conversation about sex pretty immediately. And that can look a lot of different ways.
We're just looking for a hookup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if that's what you're looking for,
yeah,
great. But I would even argue, even if you're looking for a hookup, I want to know who you are. I want to know if we can share a laugh before we have sex. Just saying, like you need to come with something else other than a pickup line.
Well, that usually comes with them saying something about your body off the bat.
Off the bat, it's body or
looks.
making an innuendo. Like I had a client recently send me screenshots. She was like, I should just ignore this, right? I can ignore this guy. And I read it, and it was, they were going back and forth talking about how where they lived, like she wasn't from there, but he grew up nearby in a town. And so they were like, oh, there's this and there's that, and kind of like just talking about the area. And then he's like, well, what else is there to do in your town besides you?
Oh, God. No way. I mean, I'm not surprised, but I would never go for that. That's ridiculous.
We're not, no.
Like how old are you?
We're not talking about that. I didn't give you an in to talk about that to me. So no.
That's so lame.
No. Anybody who
and that's a red flag.
That's a red flag. That's an absolute red flag.
That's the type of guy you would start dating for like 4 or 5 dates and then realize he's a jerk. If like he told you
if you gave him that chance
before you went out.
Exactly. If you gave him the chance, but I don't think anybody should give that a chance, because it's just trying to be slick, and like I'm not here for it.
It's not cute.
It's not cute. And other red flags are the love bombing.
Oh yeah.
I've had someone who was a single mom, and somebody right off the gate was just like, you look like you're an amazing mother. I mean, what would feel more like better to you than hearing that and having that affirmed just because like you happen to put a photo up of you and your child.
Yeah.
But this man doesn't, I mean, she was very skeptical about everything. And she was like, I do not know this man. He does not know what kind of mother I am,
But isn't that a red flag to even put up a picture of you and your child on a dating app?
I think she had a little blurred out face.
Okay.
But I actually encouraged her to, because not only was she a busy working mom, but like the time that she had, she was a mom, but she also was like had a high like stress job. So her time was really limited for dating. And I was like, the job plus kid hopefully will give someone a picture of your priorities and how they may or may not fit in. Because someone who's looking to do a last minute date with you, it's not going to happen. I think that, of course, it's everyone's choice whether or not to include a photo of their kid in their profile. I think it's really important to identify as a parent and let people know that. Because it does impact how people will date you.
Oh, for sure.
And it will have an impact if people who are not interested in being with someone who has a kid, like they should know.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just say I've been dating for 6 months and still feel like I'm not connecting with anyone I would want to be in a long-term relationship with. What should I do? Stop dating or keep carrying on?
It depends on how you feel. I work with people who experience a lot of dating fatigue and dating burnout, frankly. And at that point, sometimes it's good to take a break, to refocus on other things, to refocus on areas of your life that you get more from than dating. And from my experience working with clients and my own personal experience, every time you take a break and come back, you're a slightly different version of yourself. You have different reflections of what you want based on the time that you spent not actively dating.
Right.
And, sometimes people say, I took this break, but I was open. If someone crossed my path, I'd be open to it.
Yeah, okay.
And it may or may not happen during that break.
I mean, that was supposed to be a hypothetical question, but it sounds like me a little bit.
Okay.
But I know that I dated for a few months and I was sick of it, and I just was like exhausting. I felt like I was wasting my time.
Yeah.
My therapist was like, nope, you got to stick with it. You just because of just being in the habit, meeting different types of people, knowing what you like, working on your boundaries is really important so that you can get to that stage that when you do meet someone great, you feel really ready for them. Yeah. Which I didn't understand that because I was getting sick of dating. But it made sense because as I was meeting people that I was putting my boundaries up right from the start, I was like getting this power of feeling like, oh, okay, I'm getting better at this. I can do this. Where it was, for me, it was harder to do that and having those boundaries. And that's how I got stepped on, in the last couple of relationships.
Absolutely.
So actually the dating process, although it's daunting or sometimes you can get your feelings hurt a little bit or whatever it is, I think it's really healthy to start meeting people, because then it makes you weed out until you find maybe the one who's right for you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, dating requires an ongoing kind of assessment of how you feel. The thing that I really look for in my dating clients is if they're dragging their feet to dates, if they're coming on dates with low energy, low interest, they're just sort of, they're not bringing their best self into the dating process. And not to say that you have to be at your personal best every single date you go on, but that you have the energy, that you have the interest. I think that's really important. Yeah. So checking in and just saying, do I not want to do it because this is really laborious and I'm kind of just annoyed, or and I just kind of need an attitude readjustment,
right? Yeah.
Or have I just had some experiences that were really dissatisfying, and I need to take a step back and maybe think about what I want from this process, and I can't think about what I want from this process while I'm in it.
Yeah, well, I've already forgotten about the last date when I go on to the next date. So I'm always like, good energy, feeling great.
That's good.
Hopeful. But I find that most people feed off your energy.
They do. They do.
So if you go in with a great positive attitude, you usually get the best of them too.
Yeah.
To bring a little bit out of them.
Absolutely.
Because I'm a little bit of an extrovert. So sometimes I feel like it's good.
Yeah.
And almost wanted to pack it all in. Getting to know that person as much as you can on the first date. So you don't have to have a second one if it's not the right fit.
Well, it all goes back to that, like, hell yes or no. And, here's what I would say about that too. It's like, I think we would all like to have those experiences where we're like, hell yes.
Yeah.
I think for survivors, it might be a little trickier to get to hell yes, right? Every single time. So with that, I would say if it's a positive maybe, right? If it's like nothing egregious happened, you're just scared, or like this is new. And, sometimes getting the cobwebs off on a second date too is helpful. So yeah, just wanted to offer that to your listeners.
How important is kissing on the first date? Because what I'm finding is most men want to kiss you on the first date. And I always feel like I want to get to know somebody. I'm not really ready until like I feel like I'm ready.
Yeah.
Like maybe I'm showing those green flags. And maybe I'm making it apparent, but I feel like every guy thinks, that you want to be kissed on the first date. But a lot of times, if a guy kisses me on the first date and it's too much, I do not want to go on the second date.
Sure.
And they never know really why.
Yeah.
But it's just too much, too quick.
I mean, you can offer that feedback. I have had clients who have been on dates with guys that they wished had kissed them. I've had clients who have gone on dates where they've been kissed and didn't like it and felt it was aggressive. So there's not one like, this is right or this is wrong. Right. I do think that we're more and more getting to a place where people are asking, is it okay if I kiss you?
Yeah.
And that's a younger generation of people who are learning consent from a younger age. And it's really refreshing to see. The new Bridget Jones movie actually points this out.
What does it say?
Well, because she has a relationship with a guy in his 20s. And at the end of their very, very sweet date, he says, can I kiss you? And she says, oh, he's from a generation that asks, And so it is a little bit different. I do think it's good, actually.
Does it ruin the moment?
No.
To ask you before? Okay.
Isn't it lovely to know that someone wanted to kiss you, even if you say no? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I would think my dates would have gone better if they had asked first.
There we go. Because you would have been able to also talk about your boundaries.
Yeah.
But always feel free to give that feedback.
I just end up just running away.
Not in the moment.
I know.
But like if they text and ask you for a second date and you politely decline, you can always say like, I really wasn't ready to kiss. And in the future, it might be good for you to ask. But
then again, you can also have a date where you're like not really feeling the guy, you're not really into him, whatever. And then he can kiss you at the end of the date and you're like, oh, that was kind of nice.
I've literally never had that experience. I'm sorry.
That was kind of nice. Like, oh, you got a little more attractive to me, maybe because you have chemistry.
For me personally, I just get so much from the conversation. I guess like some of my clients, and I think I identify it this way too, I feel a bit sapiosexual, which is that intellectual
Right.
stimulation. So if you don't get me there, you're not going to get me physically. Typically, there are
Right.
exceptions for like very, very, if I'm very, very physically attracted to someone, then that can override. But then I already know that I'm physically attracted to them. So of course I want to kiss them.
Yeah. So what role does community have in survivors' healing journey from sexual violence and abuse?
Yeah, it's a huge thing, as I'm sure you know, right? Connecting with other survivors,
sure.
both specifically of Epstein, but also through this podcast, people who have connected with you and shared their stories. It's so powerful. It's so healing to know that you're not alone, especially when you have a community of people where, you know, you thought you were the only one, or you
Usually we think that way.
usually we do. And so knowing that you aren't alone and that somebody else had a really similar experience
Right.
to yours, and you can be there for each other in the kind of like ongoing unfolding of each other's healing journey, I think that's really beautiful. Humans have never really healed in isolation.
No.
It's very, very difficult. And again, you don't necessarily need therapy, but you need other people to be there for you, to hold you when you cry, to like understand that something did happen,
Yeah.
to even acknowledge that, you know, to hear your story and to say, I believe you, right? That's so important.
Well, yeah, this comfort and support of people who have gone through the same experiences.
Absolutely.
It's really powerful.
Absolutely.
If you could offer some words of encouragement to a survivor who decided this week they want to begin to explore dating and relationships again, what would that be?
I think my first assignment for them as their sex and dating coach would be to really sit down and envision how they want to feel in their next relationship. I think it's such a great and powerful visualization tool, and it will help guide you through the process. From, if you decide to go on the dating apps, it'll guide you from swiping, you know, like looking at someone's picture and kind of like thinking back to that vision and thinking, you know, can I envision myself feeling safe with this person? And the answer may be yes, no, or I don't know, but just using that as your guide throughout the process can be so helpful. I also recommend working with someone like myself, a dating coach, someone who's trauma informed, to help you along the way as you are, you know, unraveling your new story of how you want to be out in the world, and the kind of dater you want to be and the kind of sexual person that you want to be.
Are you available online?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I am. Yeah, I've seen now clients all over the world, which is
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, a lot of people I think the grass is always greener when they think of other countries and maybe they have it better and easier. No.
No, they don't. No.
No, we all have the same struggles, and that's what unites us. And yeah, so I'm available.
So where can people find you?
They can find me at myishabattle.com, or I am on X and Instagram at Myisha Battle. So pretty easy. I have a weekly newsletter that I've been writing, a bit more like biting political stuff lately. Oh yes. Like this year I'm like, I just need to let it all out. And I've gotten a lot of unsubscribes, and it's fine because I'm just like, if you can't love me at my politically upset activist self, then you can't love me.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. So when you hear the powerful statement, from now on, how would you end that sentence?
From now on, I will listen to myself and my innate feeling about people. I think that's the thing that survivors get robbed of, is that connection to that feeling that you know what's right for you. And reconnecting with that, trusting that, even outside of dating, just trusting that on a day-to-day basis, that you know what's right for you, I think is so transformational and so healing.
Well, it seems like you got a lot of your healing from what you do and helping others.
For sure.
Right. Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to our community.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Yes. This has been such a powerful conversation. I've learned so much.
Thank you.
A lot of things I'm going to go home and think about. Yeah.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
As always, thank you for joining us on From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Remember that no matter where you are on your healing journey, your story matters, and you are not alone, and you are stronger than you think. Special thanks to our amazing guest today, Myisha Battle. Elizabeth Wyndham is our senior producer, Christopher Leon is the editor, and Jose Oriana is our studio producer. Our theme music is Many Worlds by Memory Theory. If you have any thoughts, questions, or stories about your own views on topics discussed on From Now On, email us at fromnowonpod@gmail.com. And please follow, rate, comment, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If today's conversation resonated with you and you are seeking more support in your own healing journey, if you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, help is available. Call 800-656-HOPE. If you or someone you know is being trafficked, contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Text 233-733. That's Be Free. PAVE is a 501c3 nonprofit creating a world free from sexual violence and building communities to support survivors. To learn more, go to shatteringthesilence.org. Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, SOAR, is dedicated to providing a safe and empowering space for survivors of sex trafficking to reclaim their stories and stand up for themselves and each other. That's www.speakoutactreclaim.org.